Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We're here with Nikesh Shukla. We're talking about his book, Brown Baby. Um, it's a memoir of race, family, and his home life. So, Nikesh, it's a all I've got to say. I've read the book. Wow, it's a real roller coaster of emotions. There's ups, there's downs. It's funny, and it's all at the same time as well. It talks about race. It talks about your family, your kids, but most of all, it talks about grief. Could you tell us a little bit about why it was written and why it deals with such darkness?
Yeah, sure. Also, hello, people watching. Thanks so much for joining us on a Friday evening. So basically, about 5 years ago, I put out a book called The Good Immigrant, which was a collection of essays by 21 British writers of color that blew up in quite a big way for me and for the contributors. And I just found myself touring the country quite a lot, talking about racism for a living, which was quite hard work, especially given my origins as a comedy writer. And I found that quite tough. And around that time, I was a new parent. So I would rock up around different parts of the country, talk about race and immigration issues for an evening, and then go home on the train. And my rule was always, if I missed bedtime, then I had to be there for breakfast. And so I just found myself traveling around on like motorways and trains at all hours of the morning, early morning. And it, like, all of that stuff that I was dealing with or talking about, it just sort of sat very heavily on my shoulders, and it started to make me feel quite bleak about things.
Right.
Um, and we were also raising a small child, and I was thinking a lot about how to raise her to be proud of her heritage, so that she never felt half of anything. She always felt whole of various things. And one day we noticed that she had an issue with brown dolls, and that really troubled me because I didn't know where that had come from. She thought that they were dirty, and she would hide a brown doll around the house. And I wrote an article about it for the pool, and and not long after that, I was contacted by the editor of the Observer magazine, and the editor asked me if I had any more parenting column ideas. And I was like, yeah, I do actually. And so I worked out that I didn't want to write about depressing things. I didn't want to write about traumatic things. I wanted to write about joy. But the thing about writing about joy is you often have to write about the journey to joy, or the triggers that make you seek joy. And so the central question of that column was, how do we raise our kids to be joyful and boundless in a world that feels so bleak and uninviting, that I feel so sad and angry about? There's a lot to unpack in that. And when I finished writing that column, I just felt like that was a very unfinished area of writing for me. I just sort of started thinking about it all. And so, right, writing the book, I realized that I had to basically, if I was going to answer that question, I needed to think about all of the things that keep me up at night and work my way through them to joy, and how I'm going to talk to my kids about them in a way that doesn't paralyze us all, which was a really, really hard thing to counter. But also at the same time, I've been thinking about this for years. I can't, um, I can't really think about being a parent without me be thinking about being a child as well. And so, my mum's death looms large over me at the best of times. And so I ended up basically writing a memoir that dealt with myself as a child and my kids as well.
Wow. And you said that the world, growing up in a world that's so bleak. Could you explain that? Why is the world so bleak? What makes you say that?
Well, I don't mean the world is bleak. It feels. I mean, I'm sure there are some. I don't think Jeff Bezos thinks the world is bleak. I think for me, it felt bleak because I was constantly having a very circular conversation about racism, at a time when that's what the country was talking about. The immigration conversation following Brexit was, it was so binary. and it lacked any humanity for people from immigrant backgrounds. And I constantly felt like instead of having a nuanced conversation about these very complex and complicated issues, I was constantly having to reset the terms of what racism even is in the first place, which for me is like, that's like lesson one. And I thought all these centuries later, we've been talking about racism and we're still on lesson one. What is racism? And that for me is quite bleak, you know, where my mental health issues around the grief I feel for my mum, you know, like all of the sort of circular ways I feel about the sort of the stuck states, my therapist refers to them as the stuck states I feel like I'm in when I'm talking about issues around race. There's a bleakness there when I think about what it is to raise daughters in this world. I mean, especially, you know, especially this week of all weeks when we're thinking about the police and Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa and all of the other women who are the victims of violence at the hands of men in institutions that prop up men like Wayne Couzens, makes me feel bleak, especially when you think about how ingrained all that stuff is into our society when, you know, there are certain haircuts and dress senses for boys and girls. Like we're still thinking about what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a girl in such binary ways. You know, all of that, you add on to all of that, like the alarming stories we're reading every single week about how much closer we are than we think to climate collapse. You know, all of the extreme weather that we've seen in different parts of the world. This like, I could keep going. I could keep listing all of the bleak things, man. But like,
it's getting bleaker. I'd say it's definitely getting bleaker.
It's all there. And like, the thing is, as a parent and as a writer, I don't want to shy away from all of those things. But at the same time, I don't want to write about them in a way that posits them as irreversible, because that would be depressing, you know? I have to write towards a utopia where I feel like systemic and institutional racism can be dismantled. And once that can be dismantled, we can then focus on the individual prejudices of the people that those systems uphold. I have to believe that a pandemic can show us how we have to change the way we live, and when it comes to mass consumerism and what impact that has on the environment. I have to think that there is a way of dismantling all those things. I have to think that we, you know, like, you know, the thing that, you know, obviously I'm a father of daughters, so this doesn't go into the book as much, but like, we have to really think about how we raise boys as well, you know, this week more than any week, like, and you know, on any given week, that's an important thing to think about, how we raise boys. But this week more than any, like, I'm thinking, how should we raise boys, you know?
I mean,
so like, all of these things are such present topics for me, and they're such present topics for a lot of people. And a lot of the a lot of the parenting things I was reading were about like quite functional stages, like how do you deal with the sleep issue, how do you deal with weaning. Like, I wasn't necessarily reading about how parents were kind of thinking about these issues. And not only that, definitely wasn't reading anything that was written by that many people of color, you know, not many brown people thinking about these things. And you know, there have been some books that have come out at a similar time, like Candice Braithwaite's book, and oh god, it's called Bringing Up Baby. I've forgotten the name of the author. I'm so sorry. Her name's Uzi something. She's brilliant. And also Pragya Agarwal's Wish We Knew What to Say. And like, there are books out there, but there aren't that many. You know, you have to really research for them. And often I feel like I'm writing into the void that existed before I sat down to write. Like, I'm writing to fill a gap that didn't exist before, for myself and for my trail of thought and my own sense of curiosity.
I guess when I was reading the book, obviously somebody doesn't know you that well, maybe think, well, look, you know, Nikesh is an author, looks like he's got a good lifestyle, he's got a few books out, you know, he must be doing okay. You know, we're trying to understand, where is this bleakness coming from? You know, why is this lifestyle? What is it that we're trying to talk about in this book? So that was the kind of issues that were going in my head, really, in terms of when I was trying to wrap my head around why it was written in that way.
I mean, I think it is a joyful and hopeful book, though.
There is, yeah. there's some fun bits in it. There's some really funny bits in it as well. You know, there's a few lines in there that you know have different meanings, and if you really look into, you know, there are some really fun bits. But then there's some really dark connotations. You know, in the book, there's stuff about your daughter and the part when your daughter's getting passed around the family, your family members, and the uncles comes to mind. You know, and that makes you feel really uncomfortable. You compare that moment to a culture of rape and how girls especially are taught, you know, that their bodies are not their own. So tell me a little bit more about that. You know, we're talking about the rape culture here, and how girls are, you know, that their bodies are not their own. And tell us a little bit about that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to say about it all is like, I am writing about some dark subjects, but I am trying to find a route forward in all of this stuff. It's not, I don't necessarily think it's a book that wallows the whole way through. And also, you know, there are moments where I want to confront the things that have made me uncomfortable, the times where I could have acted better, the times where I want to be better, because that's how we move forward. That's how we find hope, is in like this feeling that it's not this feeling that things can get better or things will be okay, or this too shall pass, and all that kind of stuff. The way I want to think about it is, what can I learn from this moment where I may have not quite nailed how I should have been, and how can I move forward? Like, how can I be better in that situation? I can't expect the world to adjust around me all the time. And so yeah, I wanted to write about a moment where I noticed something that made me really uncomfortable, and I told two of my female friends about it, and they were both like, I'm so glad you had to have a daughter to see that what we've been saying all this time is true. And like, I did feel really uncomfortable when they said that to me, but you know, that discomfort was momentary. But also I wanted to talk about how all of this stuff, where all of this stuff starts in my family. Or, you know, none of what I say is like my pronouncements on how we should all be, or on how all families are. All I can do is write my truth, right? That's what all books are, is the author's truth. Any author who is telling you about the world rather than telling you about their world, or, you know, exploring their own curiosity, I don't always trust those books. I don't always buy them.
Sure. There's a part in the book when you say brown babies attract the most attention from strangers. One even asked if he could hold you. I declined. Why do you feel brown babies attract the most affection? What was that? What was you trying to get out in that point?
There is that, I mean, there is that sort of fetishized thing about, oh, you know, the baby with the light brown skinned baby, you know, there's sort of this cute bringing together of two worlds, and like there is this sort of facile assumption that, like, you know, mixed race babies will lead us to end racism or something, you know, because everyone will just look the same. But it's just like, it's nonsense. And also it just continues to fetishize mixed raceness, rather than like allow those kids to be who they are. Like, it's putting on to them an identity that they're literally babies. They're still forming their sense of self. They're still deciding who they want to be. So like, to put that onto them is unfair. Like, it's the same decision that people make. The decision that people make about someone else based on the color of their skin, be it a positive decision or a positive assumption or a negative assumption, like, it still comes from the same thing, the same place. But because, you know, that whole thing, oh, they're so cute, is not seen as a problematic statement, like, people don't really interrogate where that's coming from. And so I wanted people to sit in their discomfort in the same way that I sit in my discomfort as a parent all the time. Like, I grew up in a generation of where, like, my parents are infallible. I can never question my parents. I can never tell them that I thought they'd got something wrong.
Yeah.
And they perpetuated that infallibility. When it's only years later when you know, they admit that they got stuff wrong. And like, I don't want my kids to think I'm infallible. I want my kids to know that I make mistakes. Or sometimes I tell them off because I'm feeling grumpy, or like, you know, when I say something or do something, it might not necessarily be because of something that they've done. Like, you know, when you're a kid, your world is so much smaller than when you're an adult. And so, like, kids do take what parents say as face value. And, like, I don't want my kids to ever think that I'm an infallible person who doesn't have my own, like, sadnesses or anxieties or hang-ups or the rest of them. I want there to be an openness there.
It's being a real person, a real father, I guess, is what that book shows. And there's a bit in there where you know, and it really comes across that you are, you know, explaining and talking about your daughter's mixed race and her heritage through the book. You know, there's that whole conversation about the Bristol bus boycott, where the Bristol Bus Company refused to employ Black and Asians, and that really comes across in terms of, you know, the mixed race heritage and how that was conveyed to your daughter. You say the book also teaches white parents the importance of raising anti-racist ways, and so fathers should read the book and hopefully that should help them raise their daughters. What do you think it teaches brown parents and brown fathers about?
I don't know. Well, I don't know if I'm sort of arguing with myself here. I don't I don't remember saying that. Like, I don't necessarily think this book is there to teach anyone anything, you know. This book is like it's a record of all of the stuff that I've been thinking about for the last 4 or 5 years, or the last 7 years, you know, all of the time that I've been a parent. It's a record of that. It's a record of that line of inquiry. Like, it's a curious book because it doesn't ever really come to any decision about anything. If anything, it just sort of expresses a desire to be present, and that's really all I can ever do, is just be present in what my kids are doing. Like, you know, as you know, I was late to to the pre-meet, and part of that reason was one of my kids was like annoyed that I had another evening thing that I had to do, and she really wanted to read me a poem that she'd written at school, and it was really important for her that I heard this poem rather than like shunt it to kick it to tomorrow. And so, like, I sat there and she read me a poem, and like just being present in that moment was so important for her. Like, that's all I can do as a parent, and be aware that these issues are live issues for all of us. Like, I guess what I mean is, I don't think that I basically think if white parents are thinking that they don't necessarily need to teach their kids about racism and the impact of racism and the like what's going on there, then that to me feels wrong. You know, like, being an anti-racist parent starts early, in the same way that, like, being, you know, if you're thinking about how as a father you should raise boys and girls and all the rest of it, then it's a thing that, you know, affects all of us. Like, fathers should think about that. Like, we should all be thinking about these things because these are live issues in our world. Like, if white parents think that teaching your kids about racism is a thing that only parents of color, parents from BAME backgrounds, etc., if it's only an issue for them, then that to me feels wrong.
Okay. Tell us about your relationship with your mom, because obviously your mom plays a huge part within this book. Tell us, what was that relationship like?
Yeah, my mum was like my biggest antagonist. Like, I had a really difficult relationship with my mum, but it was always born out of love, you know. My mum and I loved each other, but that love came with a lot of tension, and a lot of it was to do with me wanting to kind of prove to her that my life choices were good ones, and a lot of her love for me was just pushing me to ensure that I was, like, striving to be the best at what I wanted to do. And my mum died very suddenly, and I didn't deal with it very well at the time. In fact, I kind of just put it I just pushed it down as far as it could go at the time. And it took me years to realize how like troubled I'd been in those years by her death, and how much it had completely ruptured something in me. Like I felt broken for a really long time. And a lot of that was because I hadn't dealt with her death in a very healthy way.
And that was around the time when I think you wasn't getting on with your mom, would you say, at that point, when just before she passed?
I mean, we were getting along. I think what you're referring to is the final conversation we had was an argument,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that stayed with me for a long time. Because, but you know, that was she'd been diagnosed with cancer, and she was slowly dying in front of us, and I just wanted her to know that I was doing okay. And so I went on a radio show that night. Like I left my childhood home to go and do a radio show. The interview asked me some questions about the mother character in the book. My mum thought that I was making fun of her. And when I spoke to her the next day, she was really upset about it, and that was the last conversation we had. But yeah, that conversation stayed with me because I felt like I'd wasted our final moments on a stupid argument about nothing.
And there's a bit about in the book where after your mum had died, I think it was a little while after, you found a tub of your mum's food in the fridge. You heated it up because you wanted to, have those aromas, those smells in your kitchen that, it was your mum's cooking. So obviously you wanted to make sure that, the kitchen smelled like that. It reminded you back of when she was around. Why was that so important? What was that, why was that so important to have that as part of that book?
Well, no, I mean, what happened was we were moving my father out of my childhood home, and so there were a lot of emotions wrapped up in that. And I just moved out of London for the first time, and a lot of the book is about a search for home. And when I was clearing out the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, never my father's kitchen, it was always my mother's kitchen. Yeah, I found a tub of her cooking in the freezer, and I was really like, oh my god, what do I do? This is a gift, this is a blessing, like my mum's food. And I defrosted the food, and just as the kitchen filled with the smells of my mum's cooking, it just suddenly felt like a home again, and it felt like my home, and it felt like my childhood home. And it was a really powerful moment for me, because just in that second it felt like she was there again, doing that thing that she did, which was just providing for us and cooking with love. And after I ate that food, I realized I wasn't able to recreate it, and I spent months and months and months trying to learn how to make those dishes, and nearly set the kitchen on fire, got it wrong a lot of times. Like, thing is, like, I'll never be able to recreate my mum's food because it's so idealized in my head. It's such a perfect thing. Like, it will never be as good as how it is in my head. And that's like the search that I go on to try and food becomes like a comfort for me. Like, I've become a comfort eater in the book, because I'm constantly yearning for a sense of home where I feel safe. And I describe my issues with food all the way through, and like how I sort of rely on food as a comfort. Mostly in the way of like trying to be a male writing about about something that makes me feel really vulnerable, and making sure that space is open for men to feel vulnerable about stuff, and not feel like it's a thing to pretend doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that, and food plays a massive part within the book. It must have been such a painful process, when you was writing the book, in terms of going back to that place in your mind when your mum had passed away. You'd just become a new father. Writing this memoir, it must have been such a hard thing for you to have put down on paper. Want to think about it, and secondly, then to write about it.
Yeah, it was. It was a really painful thing to write. This is the bit where I have to say, writing is not the same as therapy. Get a therapist.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time I thought writing about all of the stuff would help me kind of get through it, but it didn't help me get through it. It helped me confront it. It didn't give me, writing it and recording it didn't necessarily give me any coping strategies. Once it was out there, and actually writing the stuff about my mum was incredibly painful, because I realized that in order to put her on the page and immortalize her forever and do justice to my mother, I had to conjure her. And in order to conjure her, I had to bring her back to life.
Mm.
And then I had to have her die so I could feel the pain of it in real time. And that's what I put on the page. And it was a really, really, really like horrible process, but it's what I needed to do to like confront all of those issues that I hadn't dealt with, like all of the ways that I hadn't that I hadn't spoken about my mum's death or like dealt with it.
Did you have to take any steps after writing this book just to clear your head, to make sure that everything was the way it should be, or was that? I mean, I get it. I sometimes feel when you're writing stuff that it pushes, it twists that knife a little bit further. But yeah, a lot of people say actually no, it doesn't. It helps you get it off your mind. It clears your mind. What was your process after writing this book? Did you seek any help? What were your next steps?
Yeah, well, I don't think it necessarily it externalizes it, and it gives it form rather than it just having a formless shape in your head. But I don't necessarily think that it helps you to deal with it. I think all it does is summon the beast for me. But yeah, I needed to get therapy after writing that book, and when I handed in the final edit for it, I booked myself my first ever appointment with a therapist and started talking about these things, because I needed to speak about them in a space where someone could help me to come up with coping strategies. And I felt like I'd failed by seeing a therapist for the longest time, and it just wasn't true. I was like so unkind to myself about it, like it was a failure, and it's just not true. It's been a really positive thing for me to have done.
It's kind of that desi madness kind of thing that we all have, that if we go and see a therapy, we try to seek help, we write about things that are so personal to us that it shows we're weaker than when we are, when obviously that's not true. And I kind of understand why now you say you don't want your kids to read the book. You hope that they never have to read the book, is what you say. Because you say also, it means that if they do read the book, you don't believe that you've done your job properly. Is that correct? Is that the kind of way you feel still after writing this book? It's been a little while now.
No, I mean, what I meant when I said that was, I don't know if they'll ever need to read the book, because people keep saying, when do you want your kids? Because it's addressed to them. And I don't know if they ever will need to read it, because if I raise them in the way that I want to raise them, then all of the stuff that I cover, will have already worked our way through all of that stuff. But also, because I'm taking a snapshot of the first 5 years of being a parent, that all of that stuff is changing all of the time. If anything, it'll be a document. That's why I was saying earlier, it's like a confessional document about all of the things that were worrying me, between the years of 2014 to 2019. And like the other thing is, like, I think they'll just be really embarrassed that it exists, and that's okay. Like, I remember like me going to see an ex-girlfriend when we were at university, and she was roommates with someone who had written like a really important piece of someone who was the daughter of someone who had written a really important piece of literature, like a book that people study, like a really, really well-known famous book. And I was so starstruck when I met this person. I was like, oh my God, your dad wrote that book. That's so amazing. How cool. And she was like, I know, it's so embarrassing. And I was like, that's how my kids will feel about me. And that's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind that at all.
What kind of writer would you describe yourself as? Or would you say you're an activist? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you write about, which people say is an activist. People like to put other people in boxes. But what would you call yourself? Are you a writer? Are you an activist?
I don't think I'm an activist. Well, I'm certainly not an activist in the way that people know I am, because I think the stuff that I talk about publicly is just like doing diversity and inclusion work in the publishing industry, but that's not activism in the way that like what Sisters Uncut does is activism. That's activism. So community organizing, organizing movements, organizing protests, organizing all of that kind of stuff that speaks truth to power. That's activism. I think what I am is a writer. Like I'm a writer who writes my truth. I don't even necessarily think I'm a well, I think I'm a writer who writes about political things, but I don't think I'm a political writer in the way that there are other writers out there who are very political writers. Like like I would never put myself in the same league as someone like James Baldwin, who's one of my heroes. But at my heart, I'm a comedy writer. I like writing. I write comedy about people trying to find that, a comedy about people's identity crises, people trying to find themselves. I've just finished a new book for teenagers. Yesterday I handed it in. That'll be out in 2023, and it's a comedy book about a young comedian. That's what the book is about, and I had so much fun writing it because like I wasn't necessarily writing about social issues in the same way. I think what I am is a writer who I would like to think that I'm a curious writer who thinks deeply about the way the world is, but I'm also at my heart I'm a youth worker. Like I've been a youth worker for the last 8 years. I do youth work still. That to me drives what I do. That to me drove doing the Good Immigrant. It drove writing YA. It drove so many of my decisions as a writer, being a youth worker and working with kids. That's my favorite thing that I do.
Wow. Do you also, would you call yourself a dissy? Are you also a dissy, or?
Yeah, I don't understand the question. Yeah, I'm a British Asian desi. Yeah.
Yeah, because and in the book, one of the questions you ask is, "Am I even dissy?" When you burn the rice, that's the reason why I'm asking. Are you a dissy?
Oh yeah, I mean that's just me being silly. Because no proper desi would burn rice,
Well, I would.
But you desi.
Who do you who do you who do you represent in your writing? Do you represent British Asians? Would you say when you're doing your writing, is that something that's at the fore of your mind? That listen, I'm a British Asian. I'm going to be representing Asians on this, or are you this is I'm just trying to get in your mind in terms of how you see yourself as a writer. Are you a dissy? Are you a British Asian? What is it when you're writing?
Well, I think that whole representational thing is interesting because I can't represent all British Asians. I don't represent all British Asians. And that's okay. I don't think anyone should seek to be the voice of British Asians, because even that in itself is like, when you start to pass it out, like, you've got South Asian, you've got Southeast Asian, you've got East Asian, and then even within South Asian, you've got, Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Nepalese, Afghani, and so on and so forth. And then even within Indian, you've got Punjabi, Gujarati. Do you know what I mean? So like and then even within that, you're talking about caste structures and class structures and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And like, I think it's just impossible to represent, if you seek to represent a community, you will fail because you can't represent everyone in that community. What you can do is write stuff that feels true to you. So all I'm writing is my emotional truth. That is the truth as it occurs to me, in the hope that as I present it, it will make space for other people to tell their truths. Like, I think we should never like that whole voice of a generation thing that you sometimes hear attached to people. Like, I feel for like writers like Sally Rooney, who like gets constantly made out to be like the writer for Gen Z, when actually she's just writing stories about women in Ireland, in relationships, dealing with power structures, and as in relationships and in their lives. Like, she doesn't seek to represent all women, all Ireland, all Irish women, so on and so forth. So like, I think it's really important to remember that when I write, I can only tell you my truth in the hope that you'll tell me yours.
Cool. Well, we've got a, well, it's not actually a question. It's more of a statement here from Rida, who says, not a question, but I want to say how I felt as a brown woman in an interracial marriage with mixed ethnicity children. I felt it was like a hug that I never got from my own brown community. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thanks so much for your comment. I'm so sorry you've never had a hug, as it were, from the brown community. That sucks.
We can give you a virtual hug though, Rida.
Yeah, no, but thank you for sharing that. It was like, I think sometimes writing stuff that, I think the specificity and authenticity you give to your truth can often make the world feel more connected for other people. Like, people will read this book and either go, I see myself in this experience, or they might go, well, your experience has made me think of my own experience, or they might go, this is not relatable at all, but just so funny, or whatever reaction they have. And I think that is really important, for people to just have, like, once a book comes out, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to readers, and whatever readers bring to their read, readers bring their own lives, their own hopes, their own dreams, their histories, their traumas, their anxieties to everything that they read. And like, it is a hard thing to read something and put yourself to one side. And so when writers put something out, it just doesn't belong to us anymore. It belongs to readers, and the reactions that readers have is it's amazing. Like, it's amazing to even have a comment like that from someone like Rida, because that to me just tells me that she engaged with the work, and that is always going to be something that I'm incredibly thankful for.
Yeah, and I guess would you say that it's obviously important, people like Rida, to identify to their values, their roots, their culture, and mixed ethnicity, for instance, is is something that's part of everyday life now. So I guess, do you have a target audience that when you're writing for, you're saying, this is the audience that I want to be able to relate to this book? I mean, again, feminism plays a big part in the book. One of the reasons why you wrote the book is for your daughters, and it's important to know that that is a theme in the memoir. So who is that target audience that you're trying to reach?
I mean, I think each of the books I write, I always think about who they need to exist for. And so I wrote this book because I didn't have this book when we knew we were going to have a kid. We didn't, like, nothing like this existed. Like, my first book, I wrote it because it didn't exist for 16-year-old me. The Good Immigrant, it didn't exist for like me when I was 19 years old or what have you, like a bridge between me and like Stuart Hall or any of the amazing writers out there who were writing things that I just wasn't smart enough to get at the time. So I often think, what is the thing that what is the question that I'm asking with this book? What is the big question? What's the big thematic journey at the heart of this? And who is this for? Like who, and often it tends to be a book that I needed at some point in my life.
Would you classify yourself as a feminist woke dad?
No, it's such a nonsense term. I am a father who believes in social justice and equality and equity, but I think over labeling yourself sort of sets yourself up for failure personally.
So, I mean, you're quite privileged in a way, Nikesh. You've got a huge platform. You're able to write multiple genres, multiple audiences, I would say. How are you using this platform, to voice and support young people of color?
Um, so as I said, like I've always been a youth worker. And I mentor young writers as well. So I do a lot of work with, lots of writers, helping them to like navigate the industry or to work on their manuscripts. I set aside 5 hours a week to work with writers who don't necessarily have the act, like, because I also teach. I teach on the Faber Academy course, and I teach at the University of Bristol where I live. But obviously, those are things that people can do if they have money. So, like, I also put aside 5 hours a week, which is the amount of teaching time I have. So I match that teaching time, and I mentor 5 writers at any time. And just today, I helped a writer put together a book proposal for his memoir about growing up in inner city of South London and the London riots in 2011. I also used the clout from the Good Immigrant to set up a journal to publish writers of color who didn't want to write about race, who wanted to write about whatever they wanted to write about. And off the back of that, set up a literary agency representing writers from marginalized backgrounds, because obviously when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's not just race, it's also class, it's also sex and gender and neurodivergent writers and writers with disabilities and the intersections between all of those things. And there we employ like 3 or 4 agents who all represent writers who are writing amazing stuff but are from marginalized communities, and we get their books out there. Like this year alone, I can't remember the exact numbers, between 10 and 20 books that we've represented have come out already this year in October, which is really, really amazing. I also worked with Sunny Singh, the amazing writer, to set up a prize for writers from writers of color called the Jalak Prize, because what we felt was, every time people talk about diversity and inclusion issues in the publishing industry, it always sounds so miserable. And we wanted to celebrate writers doing amazing things, and so we set up this prize, which is now in its 5th year, which is really great. So yeah, I feel like I do my bit for young writers of color, for sure.
Amazing. There's another question here in the Q&A box from Lucy Robson. She says, what's the journal called, Nikesh, that you set up?
It's called the Good Journal. We did 4 issues of it back in 2018. Yeah, we don't have any plans to anymore. I've done 4 anthologies now, and I never want to do another one ever again. They're a lot of work. They're really hard work. So yeah.
So, Nikesh, the memoir, it's intended, if I'm correct, for young people of color that need someone to tell them that their stories matter. Who was there, or do you feel they haven't got a voice, or they can't go online and put a post out, or why are you talking about mainstream here? Why is it that we don't seem to have that voice?
I don't know if the memoir is for that though. But in terms of young people of color who may not feel like they have a voice, I think for the longest time, there just wasn't that many writers, like South Asian writers, getting published, and that resulted in people not like feeling like books were about them or for them or about their communities or for their communities. And I think that meant that can have like an effect on people feeling like their stories don't matter. If I can't even have a story about someone who looks like me in the mainstream, does my story even matter? Like if I'm not even the sidekick, if I'm not even in the book in the first place, or if I am in the book, it's because I'm the terrorist or the IT support, then that can. I think that that's why it's so important to me that children have diverse representations of people from as many different backgrounds as possible in their books, because it shows them, it normalizes for them that people from different backgrounds who don't look like them can be main characters, and if they can be the main characters, then I can be the main character.
Yeah, so it's that representation that people can see other people that look like them, come from similar backgrounds, and then maybe they can follow in your footsteps. I guess is that what it is?
I mean, I don't know if I want to follow my footsteps. Yeah, don't do it like me, guys. Like, hopefully, we've made the industry easier for young people to come through now, rather than like the weird hoops and hurdles I had to jump through.
Well, you're doing a lot of good work there, Nikesh. I mean, your youth work, all the stuff that we've just spoken about. Surely, you're opening doors. But would you say that they're opening fast enough, or in that? I mean, I presume there's going to be more books to come, which also talk about these issues in the community, and mixed race and interracial marriages, and all the stuff that we know that's taboo. I mean, DESIblitz, we deal with a lot of that stuff on our magazine, so that we know there's a huge amount of topics still that haven't been touched. But would you say you're creating that? You're the guy who's going to open those doors and create that, or would you say actually don't follow? You said don't follow me. Would you? What is it? Should they be following you? Should they not be following you? Should they be looking elsewhere? What is it?
Well, no, I mean, it's a lot of responsibility onto me.
Somebody has to do it.
Well, I think what it is like, I think as a writer I do a lot that's not writing. That's a lot of like opening doors for people, but like I would also like to just write, and I think what I've seen, that's really amazing. Like, I'm not also the only person doing this. I guess the thing is, like, the Good Immigrant blew up, and so it felt like I was one of the more prominent people doing this. But there's been people doing this stuff from behind the scenes for ages. Like Bernie Evaristo, she won the Booker with her 8th book, but like her entire career that she's been there for all of us. And it's only like with her 8th book that the rest of the country, the rest of the world, like finally gave her what she deserved. But she's been there. Same with people like Corche Newland. He's been there. Corche Newland, he had a book out this year called A River Called Time, and he wrote a couple of the Small Axe episodes, and he's got a short story collection coming out. He's an amazing writer, but he's been there for years, so like I think it was just, there was a time where I was seen as one of the more prominent voices doing this stuff, and that's great. But what's also great is like now I'm seeing people who are being published for the first time at the moment also doing all of this stuff, and that's great because that means I can just write, because that's all I ever wanted to do, and they can also like widen the discussions about the taboo subjects, as you mentioned, because like it, they're going to have different different things that they think are important or different takes on these things, and that's brilliant. But also, like, what I'm also seeing, which is brilliant, is like there are brown writers coming through all the time who aren't just writing about social issues, and that's the most important thing. Like, they're writing about whatever they want to write about. Like,
But do brown writers have, if they are, especially, if they're getting that limelight, they're getting into places where you don't normally get brown writers getting into, do they not have that, that burden on their shoulders, or that, I guess that, you're at the bottom of the stairs, and you've got the hand there to pull those other guys up. You've got that opportunity to either say, actually, I'm going to talk about this stuff, or I'm not going to talk about this stuff. I'm just going to carry on and do what everybody else does, I guess, and just not even address the issues. Because I guess that is a huge responsibility for someone who's got the opportunity to be able to do that.
yeah, and you know what? Like, I wouldn't want to like put onto anyone else what they feel responsible to do, what they feel comfortable to do. At the end of the day, like, when all's said and done, we we finish our journeys alone or what have you. Like, I'm being silly, but like,
Born alone, die alone. Yep.
well, but I guess what I mean is like it's up to people to make their own individual choices about what they're willing to do to kind of make this industry, make these industries an easier place or not. Like, some people just want to get on with making the work and be seen for making the work, and the work stand for um, who they are more than like advocacy work. There are other people, I guess, like, I had an opportunity and I decided I wanted to speak out, and I did. But I wouldn't want to like put that onto anyone else. Like, I wouldn't want to put that responsibility onto anyone else. It's up to them to make their individual choices about what they're kind of comfortable with, I personally feel like I have a responsibility to the next generation, but I think a lot of that is because when I first started out, I was mentored by the guys from Asian Dub Foundation, from DESIblitz, and as Sam from the State of Bengal. And then when I was turning my hat to writing, I was mentored by Courtier, as I mentioned, Courtier Newland and Rajiv Balasubramaniam and Nia Ikwe Parks and Niven Govindan and Selena Godin. And without them I wouldn't have had a career, and Ruxana Yasmin as well. And then, like, when I was coming up alongside people like Musa Okwonga and Inwa Elams and Irfan Master and all of these amazing writers, and like, without their support, without them by my side, like, I would have. And so I can't pay any of them back. I can pay it forward, and that's really, really important to me. But like, I couldn't put that responsibility onto anyone else. But I hope that other people would feel like they want to pay back as well.
So I guess the Asian Dub Foundation was that the early rap days for you when you was doing your rap career?
Yeah, early terrible rap days.
We've got a question here. We just quickly get to this question from Aisha Farouk. Is having a literary agent an essential part of the publishing process, and what would you recommend for someone who is writing their first book? From Aisha.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha. So I would say I think it's really important to have a literary agent, mostly because I signed my first ever book contract without a literary agent, and I wish I had had a literary agent at the time. Literary agents are your advocates in all manner of things, but mostly, like, one of the things they do is make sure that your contracts are good and your contracts aren't going to screw you later on down the line, or your contracts are honorable, or your contracts benefit you as the writer. They can negotiate for you, they can advocate on your behalf, but also if if you and your publisher end up in a tricky situation, as some people do, like, your agents can basically step in and be bad cop if they need to be, but also your agents can spot opportunities in your career. Like, I've been really, really lucky with my book agent and my film and TV agent, that they've made sure that my contracts have been robust. One of them is working on a contract, and it's taken them like 6 months to get that contract. I've written the bok is done, but they're still working on the contract because they don't want me to do okay out of it. Publishers are a business, and so they will always do a bit better than the writer. And in terms of, like, What was the second half of your question? Sorry, the second bit of your question was.
Second bit was, what would you recommend for someone who is writing their first book?
So what I would say to someone who's writing their first book is take your time. I think so much writing advice is like write 1,000 words a day, like, you know, light a candle, it's a big noise. But actually, I think what writers don't do with their first book is take the time with it. And by that I mean, when you finish your first, writing is rewriting, writing is editing, writing is taking time away from your manuscript and coming back to it and reading it and experiencing it as a reader and trying to spot all of the things that a reader would spot about this book, and then editing it. And so much of the work, you think that the first draft is hard, but actually every draft after that should be just as hard, because the editing should be as much work as the writing of the first draft. So I would say I always recommend people do at least 4 edits before they send it out. But the biggest gift you can give yourself is time between those edits, because what I found is like, so like, just to give you an example, I sent off my manuscript to my editor yesterday. She probably won't get to it for a couple of months. It'll take her a couple of months to read it and come back to me with notes. And I already know stuff that I want to do to the next version of the manuscript. But when she comes back, I will have had so much time off the manuscript, 2-3 months, that I will be able to see what she's talking about, rather than like when you just finish something and you feel all like warm and fuzzy about it and you feel a little bit defensive, is that can sometimes be because I'm trying to work on it too quickly after finishing it. So give yourself time, basically.
Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. What about publishers on that note, Nikesh? Now, we have had people write to us and tell us that, listen, I'm a person of color. I want to write about my own experiences. I want to write about my own lifestyle and what I've experienced being an Asian and a British Asian, etc., etc. But the publishers want me to change the book because they believe it's not going to sell. Should I water down my experience, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
No. I think if a publisher is asking you to make changes you're uncomfortable with, you're well within your right to fight to not do that. Because if they're going to turn it into a book that you're not proud of, basically, like, once a book comes out, if it's got an ISBN number and a barcode, a copy of it has to be sent to the British Library. And that British Library archive will last for as long as there is an archive at the British Library. So your book's going to last for as long as there is a British Library. And would you want your book to be in the British Library forever, knowing that you'd watered it down? That would freak, the thought of that freaks me out. So, like, the thing is, publishers will always have thoughts on what they think might sell your book, but they don't know your book better than you know your book. That's the thing to remember. You know your book best. You came up with the idea. You spent all of that time with those characters. You spent all of that time thinking about the plot, all the rest of it. Sure, they've got the experience of having edited loads of other people's work, but only you have the experience of that book. So remember what makes that book unique and write the book that you want to write, because once it comes out and it exists forever, if you have rewritten it because the publisher told you to, and you find that a bit cringe, that's going to come back to haunt you. That's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night.
Wise words there from Nikesh. Nikesh, tell me what gives you hope, and do you feel that the future is going to be bright?
What gives me hope? Both my daughters have a real capacity for kindness and empathy, and that gives me hope. What was the second question?
Well, do you feel the future is going to be bright for you?
For me?
for you, well, I would say for everyone really, but let's make this a little bit more personal for you. How do you feel the future's looking? Do you see it as a good future? Is there going to be good stuff happening? Is it going to go downhill? You know, we've got lots of stuff going on right now. We've just spoken about lifestyle and all the stuff that's happening right now. But what do you, how's it personally from your perspective? What do you feel? Where are we heading?
I think for me, like, all I ever wanted to do was write a novel, and I wrote that novel, and everything after that has been bonus. In terms of us, the world, I do like, maybe it's the types of young people who I work with, but the young people I work with possess a language to talk about so many things I did not possess a language to even think about when I was growing up. And the fact that they're able to communicate how they feel, and they're able to communicate around issues of injustice, and they're able to communicate in a way that's much emotionally smarter than I have ever been able to. That gives me hope.
Okay, and what's next in terms of books for you? I know you've just said there's one just coming out, is there right now?
Yeah, so in September, a couple of weeks ago, we put out a brand new, well, not brand new, but a 5th anniversary edition of the Good Immigrant. So it's got a brand new introduction and a new cover and everything. March next year, I put out a book on writing. Like, I've written a book, a creative writing book, which will help people to tell their stories. And then I've got a couple of other things that I can't talk about, but they're pretty exciting.
Nikesh, I want to thank you for being with us this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you. We've learnt loads. Some difficult questions, but some really good answers. So appreciate that. Guys, if you haven't bought the book, make sure you get a copy of it. It's a really good read, but as I said, make sure you have some tissues when you're reading this, because it's a tough read. It's a good read, but there are some really funny bits in it as well. But it's overall, get the book. Thank you again, everyone who's joined us. DESIblitz is happy, and we're really proud to obviously put on our literature festival every year. We're going to have another edition of it. Today is the last event for this year's festival. Again, next year we'll have the DESIblitz Literature Festival. Hopefully we'll have more events in person than we did this year, touch wood with COVID, and we look forward to see you all again. Thank you very much, Nikesh. Any last words?
Yeah, thank you. Can I just say one thing about DESIblitz Literature Festival? Thank you for putting it on. It's brilliant. Like, about 10 years ago, there was a South Asian Literature Festival in London, and it was brilliant, but it only lasted for a couple of years. And I love that you guys have gone, you know what, let's put on a festival that prioritizes South Asian voices and voices in the diaspora and voices from marginalized communities. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for creating the space.
Well, again, and I want to thank you for that, Nikesh, because it's authors like yourself that we're looking and aspiring to, in terms of bringing in that new generation, those grassroots kids who, people like Aisha who are writing books, and hopefully, we can start that trend and bring in grassroots and new voices into the industry. So if it wouldn't be for people like you, we wouldn't exist either. So thank you again, and we wish you well, and we'll hopefully catch up with each other soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye now.